Today, we take care of that noisy power steering pump on the 300ZX twin turbo. Welcome back to the Auto Obsessive Garage. Chadwick with you again for another installment of Project Z32 Turbo. That's our 1990 Nissan 300ZX Twin Turbo. On today's episode, we're going to remove the power steering pump. I'm going to walk you guys how to do this. It is quite a process. Reason being is the pump was leaking and making an awful grinding sound. You do not want a power steering pump to go and seize up, snap a belt, and end whatever fun road trip or traveling adventure you're having. So today I'll show you guys how to remove that power steering pump. Let's get in the garage and get a little dirty.
That power steering pump sounds awful. And you'd think something's wrong with your engine, but let me show you on my engine noise enhancer device what that power steering pump sounds like. That's off of it. On it. You can hear when I come off and on, the noise gets very loud. That is a very noisy power steering pump. Time to get that out of there.
Time to rectify our noisy power steering pump on the 300ZX by removing these intercooler and intake lines and this upper radiator hose. In removing this upper radiator hose, if you have coolant in your system, you're probably going to make a mess. So go ahead and drain your coolant beforehand. Power steering, you want to use a turkey baster or similar item to pull that fluid out. You don't want power steering fluid going everywhere. It might damage your paint and you don't want to make a mess. Pretty nasty stuff actually. So go ahead and siphon as much of that out as possible. We're probably going to remove this reservoir to give us access to the side of the unit. But I think removing this bundle of tubes and piping here will give us plenty of access to get to the power steering pump. So pretty standard bands. Let's go ahead and remove those at this time and see what we're working with underneath. So slight change of plans here. We're going to go ahead and pull the radiator and fan shroud. Really straightforward on this car since this is not an electric powered fan. So you don't have to worry about any connectors or anything. Sometimes that's a big deal when you go to pull a radiator, but super easy. Two 10mm bolts holds the radiator and shroud in place. We're going to pull it up as one unit. Underneath there is the large coolant lower radiator hose. You want to go ahead and drop that at this time. You don't want anything connected while you pull it up through. And there's this little overflow here that goes down to your overflow reservoir. You want to slide that little hose off so you're not connected when you pull it. Cancel that project real quick. We're going to have to go ahead and loosen these 4 nuts that hold the clutch fan into the water pump. Okay, what you're looking at is the back of the clutch fan where it goes into the water pump. You can see those 4 nuts. Should be 10mm each. Let's go ahead and spin those off. You might have to rotate the water pump to get to the one on the bottom. But let's go ahead and pull those off and then we should be able to wiggle that off and pull the fan up. All right, I was able to remove all those 10mm nuts. They all have a crush washer underneath. A magnetic pickup tool is gonna be your best friend on this operation. Try not to drop them. If anything, they'll get caught in the fan shroud and you can easily get them. I was able to access all 4. It's a tight squeeze. If you need to rotate your crank, which is another way to get that water pump to turn, you can use a 27mm socket and crank the engine over by hand. And that's another good way, but I was able to get all 4 without having to do that. With those nuts removed, you still may find your clutch fan does not want to let go. Use a pry bar, pry against a solid surface, such as these pipes here, and apply even force, nothing too crazy, and eventually it will pop off. Okay, now with it loose, you should be able to wiggle it out of this shroud here. So up off of the water pump. There we go, just wiggle it right out. And you can hear a little bit of coolant dropping out. Your radiator might still have some fluid in it, so just, of course, have something underneath. And now it's time to just simply move the radiator and shroud straight up. Just make sure you're not snagging on anything. I'm actually going to let it drain out a little bit into my pan. Rather not make any more of a mess than I need to. All right, with everything out of the way, I'm gonna go ahead and remove that pulley on our power steering pump first. The replacement one I bought did come with one, which is nice, but it just makes getting to everything a little easier. So what you're gonna wanna do is, even when you put the car in gear, everything's gonna rotate when you're loosening it, just because there's not enough resistance. So I like to put a pry bar or a small screwdriver, brace it through one of the holes, and you can simply get that nut off. Should be a nut and a crush washer holding that pulley on. Go ahead and pull your screwdriver out. Now it's time to actually loosen up the tension on this belt, and that way we can slide it off. There are going to be a few bolts. Let me actually show you under here. So you can see the pulley for the power steering pump. There's actually a bolt we need to loosen right behind here, so you got to line this hole up and shoot straight through there. You also Again, all these nuts and bolts holding this on are 12 millimeter, except for the 14 millimeter that you access through this little hole here. Here's the tensioning mechanism. As you can see, you loosen this bolt in the rear and it slides. This is where you'd have that nut in the front, tight and loose to get that belt tension. There are a couple more bolts on the back. We'll get those off, but you can see it's pretty nasty. I have a feeling we had a power steering leak at the pump. All right, with everything loosened up, you should be able to slide the pulley and belt off. Belt looks to be in good shape. Pulley came off. Pulley doesn't have any nicks or any other damage. A lot of times these get damaged over time, people dropping them when they're changing belts and whatnot. But there we go. Time to start getting the pump out. The name of the game is still loosening everything up so we can get access to get all those hoses out. Man, this is turning into quite a chore. You can actually loosen up two 10 millimeter bolts on a small bracket back here. Ultimately, we're gonna get this accordion hose out of the way and this metal J-pipe to get better access to our power steering pump. Gonna bend it up out of the way here, just get it clear out of our territory. That's gonna allow us access back here to some clamps. Same with all these kind of vacuum lines. We might not have to disconnect that, just kind of tuck it out of the way. We basically just need access down in here. Power steering reservoir, we're gonna have to obviously disconnect some lines, clean some stuff up so you can loosen these three 10 millimeter bolts. And that should also be able to be lifted right out of the way. Did want to share something with you guys. You can skip removing the actual fan itself. These clips on the side of the fan shroud on both sides can easily be unclipped, and you can actually slide the bottom half off. That allows you to pull the shroud and radiator up without having to remove the fan. But your fan will still be there. I'd rather have it out of the way, so we removed it. As you go along and you're removing various hoses, clamps, wires, pieces, not a bad idea to get some bright tape and use a marker to kind of mark where everything goes. Just helps you out when you're putting it all back together. So just moving these two hoses out of the way. Like I said, as much room as we can get, the better. Jam them right up there out of the way, out of our little area here. We'll pull him out in a second. I think I'm gonna remove this top little section here while these wires going across so I can get down and get these pipes out of here. And that's gonna give us plenty of room to do what we need to do. I'm gonna get a bungee cord and just kind of hold this out of the way. And then you have a bracket holding this metal kind of J-pipe on. I've already loosened the pipe, but I need to take this off. Oh, looks like a 10. There we go. Metal J-pipe up. After taking that pipe off, it's good to jam something down there so we don't drop anything, especially something that points straight up like that. That is never a good time when you hear something clang and go down into a hole. Perfect. Now when you undo any of these power steering lines, make sure you have something underneath because they're always going to leak. Also, there are two washers on either side of the banjo bolt. You do not want to lose those, so just be aware of those when you're taking everything apart. In case you're wondering, this is your high cast power steering pump, so really its main responsibility is getting that power steering fluid back to your high cast system in the rear. There we go. Now we can easily pull up on this little accordion hose here. There we go, get them out of there. And now we gotta do the other end. There's the accordion hose out. Again, we're definitely gonna wanna clean up in this area before we put everything back together, but put something to block where the J-pipe connect and where the accordion connect. You just don't want anything falling down in there. Now we have good access to our power steering pump, and I wanna show you guys what I'm looking at. To loosen your bolts on your power steering pump, if you have fluid in there, it's gonna start to drain out, so make sure you have a drain pan. Now, some of these hoses can be a little tough. They can be a little tough to get off, some of the rubber, like that rear one. So it might be worthwhile to actually track that back to the reservoir up here and disconnect it from the bottom there, kind of pull the whole hose out. But go ahead and methodically go around your power steering pump and disconnect everything. After you've disconnected everything, even if you pulled out that large bolt that allows it to pivot on the power steering pump bracket, the power steering pump might still be stuck in there. You can actually get a pry bar, kind of wedge it down in there and pry against the housing is what I'm gonna try. So I'm gonna do that this time and try to get it free. A little bit of prying and the unit is now nice and loose. So I'm gonna go ahead and try to, you can see all that nice power steering fluid coming out. Pull the unit out. Probably gonna make a little bit of a mess doing this, but now I can actually pull that power steering pump right out. It really took some convincing with screwdrivers and lots of silicone lube, but we got her loose. Ah, here she is, that wonderful power steering pump. Time to disconnect these other hoses and get the new unit installed. Oop. Time to do some serious cleaning in here, but this is all you have to remove. Made it sound like there's not much, but this is everything you have to remove to get that power steering pump out. Yeah, this is not a small job. I think I've done timing belts where I had to remove less. So here we are, and here you have it. Everything on the floor here, fan, shroud, all the hoses, lines, a lot of piping. You can see the actual power steering pump, pulley, all the hardware. Quite a little job. Here's our old noisy power steering pump removed from the vehicle. As you can see, completely coated in old power steering fluid and other nasty materials from the engine bay. Now this thing was making a horrible noise. A rebuild kit can sometimes save these, but this is the original, 200,000 miles. I don't know. I'm gonna just source a low mileage or rebuilt one to slam that in. But yeah, here's what it looks like. You can see all the various connectors you have to do. This was a rubber hose. You got your two 27 millimeter banjo bolts there you gotta do. Then obviously this is where your pulley goes. Pulley was in good shape, so this is potentially a rebuildable unit, so I may hang on to it, but time to get a new one in there and clean up that whole area because it is nasty, doing no part to this thing leaking for so many years. All right, we blew a little time, had to clean this area up. I don't want to get completely disgusting again when I go to put the new power steering pump back in, so looking a lot nicer, cleaner. You can see a shiny alternator down there now instead of something covered with power steering fluid and old residue. Red paint on the side instead of just old, I don't know, oil gunk and everything else. So looking much, much better. Here's a power steering pump comparison, the classic old versus new part. As you can see, the old one is very crusty, really nasty on top with lots of leaks over the edges. You can see the pulley in the front has a little chip up here. These are all things that aren't great, and it's making that awful noise, which is the real reason it's being replaced. But here's our rebuilt unit. It's an OEM rebuilt. You can still see it's got the clean sticker there. Really good condition, cleaned up pretty nicely. It's not re-spray painted like some units are when they're remanufactured, but this is an OEM Nissan one. It looks really good. The pulley looks to be in fantastic condition, which is good. You want to look out for nicks. They can damage the belt, obviously. But this is our good unit, rebuilt with OEM parts, and that's what I like. I don't want to mess around with aftermarket for something like this. So we're gonna go ahead and install this back in the car with all the cleaned up hoses and lines, and I'm sure it's gonna be real fun figuring out how to stuff it in there, but let's get that project going now.